Stream. Okay, got it.
Yes, yeah. So we're live on Facebook and YouTube. So hello to everyone and good morning.
Good morning, social media.
Is that how
We are here with Joe Tedeschi. We're going to be talking about his book, A Rock in the Clouds, a very interesting story.
Tedeschi.
Tedeschi, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. It has my initials in there, so I assume Tedeschi.
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 Yeah.
Joe Tedeschi. Or do you prefer Joseph?
Joe. Joe, please.
Thank you. All right, Joe. Yeah, we're gonna dive into Joe's story throughout the program this morning. Talk a bit about the events we have coming up, some interesting and fun stuff. A bit about what's going on with the Veterans Breakfast Club, and yeah, we're happy that social media is joining us for our coffee hour this morning. Raising a glass to everyone out there in social media world.
Oh, I didn't bring mine.
No, all right.
I got my water.
That's good.
There you go. Did you find the music, Ellie?
I didn't. I will be using the happy hour music. I'm not sure what we did with our nice, I forget what title the music had, but it was a little bit, it woke you up a little bit more than the
right. It
than
was
the
a little
happy hour music. A little bit more in your face, time to wake up.
I'm gonna turn back on my heater and I'll explain why in a minute when we jump into the program.
Jeez.
Turned it off because I was like, oh, it's getting hot in here. Nah, it's getting cold again.
Did you have heat when Pittsburgh got all that snow?
Well, we got nailed with the snow on Sunday night.
Okay.
And our heater blew on Monday night.
Okay.
So coldest week of the year, and the heater said, I'm done.
Well, is that what happened?
Yeah.
Oh boy. Well, I will start the theme music and let people in.
Let's do it.
That's how it works.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Veterans Breakfast Club's Coffee Hour for Wednesday, January 19th. I'm Sean Hall, the Director of Programming with the VBC. And with me, as always, is the media producer, Ellie DiPassino. Ellie, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Doing pretty well.
You are there in chilly Chicago?
Yes, chilly Chicago. Yeah, it's gonna be getting even colder. So
well, I understand cold because everyone here who is normal to our Zoom room probably notices I have a little bit of a different background. Well, here in Pittsburgh, my furnace decided to kick the bucket, as it were, 2 nights ago. So a bit chilly here in the Hall household. I have a little heater over here in my guest room, and they're replacing my furnace as we speak. So I have a bit of an ad hoc thing going on here with VBC this morning. Super excited, though, to welcome Joe Tedeschi to talk about his book, A Rock in the Clouds. We got a lot to go over with his story. I almost don't know where to start, but I will probably start in the beginning here in a minute. But first, I want to go over what we have coming up this week with the Veterans Breakfast Club. There's a lot of good stuff coming up here. If everyone can see that, we have Joe Tedeschi this morning. We're going to be talking with him about his book. This coming Saturday, we have our first members only event. If you are not a member, you can go onto our website. You can sign up right up at the top. It's $36 a year. All the proceeds go into VBC so that we can continue to bring you the programming that you've been enjoying over the past 2 years on Zoom. And you get different things like the magazine, you perks on a bunch of different stuff. It's all listed there on the site, but you also get invitations to our monthly special members only events. And this first one coming up Saturday night is a Jeopardy themed members only event on Saturday night, September. I don't know why I thought September, maybe, who knows? Saturday, January 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern time. I will be playing the role of Alex Trebek. So I've been watching a bit of Jeopardy highlights so that I could get the way he talks down. You gotta have that certain delivery whenever you're giving the answers. But we got 3 teams of 3 non-veterans, teenagers, and veterans going up against each other. It's going to be a good night. If you're not a member, make sure you sign up so that you can be there on Saturday night and join us for the fun. It's not just going to be Jeopardy. There's probably going to be a lot of conversation going on in the room because Todd is an incredible Jeopardy knowledge. He's like a huge ball of Jeopardy. And if you just point him in the direction of making Jeopardy answers, you watch the magic happen. So he's got a lot of cool stuff that's coming up that you guys will enjoy. Also, Monday night is the anniversary of the Pueblo crisis. We're going to be having some Pueblo veterans on. That'll be Monday, January 24th, 7 p.m. Come back for our happy hour that night. We also had a podcast released on Monday that I host. This is season 5 that we are into, Ellie. It's been kind of crazy that we're already into season 5 of the podcast, but something I didn't really know about was military fraternities. I didn't know there were that many of them. I also didn't know there were military sororities. But one of them contacted us, Mu Beta Phi, and they said, hey, we'd love to come on the podcast, talk about our fraternity, all the work that we're doing, helping out the community, helping out veterans in need, veterans of color, marginalized veterans, a lot of stuff that they are into. And they've grown very quickly, very fast. I think they started in 2017 and they've already gone worldwide. So if you're interested in listening to the podcast, Ellie will put the link in the chat here. You can watch it on YouTube, which is great because you could sort of like skip around in it. Or you can download it wherever you get your podcasts and listen to it on your way to work if you are going to drive out there, or whenever you want to. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts or comments about Mu Beta Phi or military fraternities in general. Always interested to hear from people who have listened to the podcast. But otherwise, Ellie, any other thoughts before we get started today?
No, I don't think so. I think that's about it.
Awesome. Joe, I'm going to welcome you here into the program. Joe Tedeschi, author of A Rock in the Clouds. I'm going to bring up a screenshot here. There we are. Obviously, that released last year. That's a little bit old of a date, but it's a C7-A that you were on. This is sort of like the apex of the book, that you were a survivor of this crash that happened in Vietnam. And we'll get to all of that because I was talking a bit about, hey, we're going to have Joe Tedeschi on tomorrow, last night on the program. And I said, what do you ask somebody who has survived a plane crash? How do we even begin to like talk about the day and getting through that ordeal and being able to adapt and then survive that, and then what is your thought process after it? All those questions I'd love to be able to ask you, but I do want to get to that part of the story because I feel like there's a lot that we should talk about that happens prior to that plane crash, and it has to start with your sort of young years in your service and why you decided to join. And welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much, John and Ellie and everyone. Thanks for your interest in my book. I appreciate you doing this time of the morning. Thank you. So,
of course.
What was that a question, or what did you want me to just
sort of? Let's start at the beginning of your service. Why did you decide to join? Or did you get drafted?
Oh no! Oh dear me! It's all. It's in the book. No, I admit freely right at the beginning that I knew very little about the Army, and as I was walking in what they call the Sally Port of West Point, I didn't know a hell of a lot about West Point either. And so this was an answer to all my desires, hopes to get a college education. I was pretty strapped for money. And so the first part of the book was how I got my commission, my appointment. And there's an interesting story there on how I hitchhiked from Canton, New York. I was spending a year at St. Lawrence University to Boston College in the Boston area to take the West Point exams in March of 1952 and 53, sorry. 53, and had some remarkable adventures to get me through there. Got the exams and hitchhiked back in the middle of a snowstorm. all that.
You know,
all
that's
that-
something that your generation, and I love that because there was something in your generation that loved to hitchhike. Like my grandfather liked to hitchhike. Like nobody hitchhikes anymore, to my knowledge. But
Sean, I got to tell you, that was a way of life back then.
yeah,
I dressed Joe College, coat and tie, and had my little signs, and really did very well. In fact, that ride I got from Albany to Chestnut Hill in Boston was what I call a miracle. The truck driver drove me right to the bottom of the Chestnut Hill and said, "Hey, the campus is up there," and this is around midnight. And that's when I started walking up the hill and get stopped by a policeman. And I'm looking. It's all in the book, but I was looking for my friend Turk Petraka, who was playing for Boston College at the time. I was trying to find his room in Liggett Hall. It's after midnight, and I got there. The place is dark, and I've got his postcard with his room number on it. So I started walking through the halls, and I finally ended up in front of this door. And I said, if I knock on this door and it's not Turk, what am I going to do? but I did knock, and about 2 or 3 times, and then finally the door opened, and there was Turk, all 6 foot something. He was a big guy, and he yelled Joe, and I yelled Turk, and that was it. He put me up for the night. Then I took the West Point exams for the next 3 days. Then I started hitchhiking back to Canton, and things got a little rough then. That's when I ended up with that snowstorm. I guess I'm pointing out, Sean, there's been a lot of coincidences in my life, fortunate coincidences that I can only explain because somebody was looking out for me. I mean, it was pretty stupid of me to hitchhike in the middle of the winter from Canton, New York to Boston, but I didn't have the money. And so it all worked out for me. And then I ended up after the snowstorm in the home of, you got to read the book, guys, to make any sense of this, but Pop Scholl, who was the principal of Watertown High School, I was right below Watertown. I ended up getting a ride to his house, and he put me up for the rest of that night. And so all these fortunate things in my life have shaped my life from the beginning. And
well, there's certainly, like you said, a lot of different miracles, and one being, the plane crash and walking away from that. Get yourself into the service, and we'll hopefully not do too many spoilers for the book. We want people to definitely check it out. But talk a bit about, you get in, you're heading out to Vietnam. What were your thoughts about it? What were you expecting?
Well, it's a mixed bag because, of course, I was apprehensive. At the same time, I was leaving my young family, and I was being deployed as a single replacement for a by name replacement of another officer who had to come home on a emergency leave, and so and at the same time, I was excited by the prospect. I knew I had to get into this war. I was a career Army officer. I wanted to be in this war, and gosh,
what year was this?
I'm sorry, say that again, Sean.
What year was it?
This is 1966.
Okay, so early in the war. And was there a reason that you felt that you wanted to get into the war?
Oh my gosh, all my background with my readings on communism and so forth, on the geopolitical thing, I really felt that we should be there, and we were doing the right thing, and I wanted to be part of the Army that was doing the fighting, and so yeah, that I was inspired from there, and plus I was very undergrade. They were putting me in a job 2 levels above my pay grade, and so I was very excited about that part of it, and chemical operations were getting a lot of play just about that time with the CS and the Agent Orange. There was a lot going on there. So yeah, the role of the chemical corps officer was becoming bigger, much bigger. And so I was excited from that point of view that maybe there's a way I can help this war along with some of the chemical weapons and the chemical agents that we had. So
Did
Yeah,
you have a family history of military service?
Uh, yes, in a sense. My father was World War One Navy. He was an enlisted man. Got torpedoed on a tanker in the middle of the English Channel, and got picked up by a British destroyer. Spent a few hours in the ocean before they picked him up. I guess that's about the extent of my military background. I was very proud of my father's service. I got his record up there. I keep it on the wall. But no, I did not have a back. Again, if you in the book, I start out by saying how little my youth, my younger years had nothing, no hint toward the military. No, I got to tell you, my motivation was pretty much I needed a college education. Service. If they'd sent me to Annapolis, God forbid. but if I had gotten an appointment to Annapolis or the Merchant Marine Camp, I was happy. I was happy to go to any one of them. I would have gone to the Air Force Academy, but there wasn't around back then. So no, it was strictly and I explained how the realization of what I was trading off when I got there at West Point. So it all came to a reality when I saw what I had to pay to get for this education, and but the two of them came together, and I bought the package and bought the Army, and I bought career service, and West Point did a good job in pointing me in that direction. So
no doubt. And you mentioned that you left your small family. Did you had a wife, or
yes,
what was your family?
a wife and a 7-year-old daughter and a 18-month-old daughter, and that was a wrench. I've got to tell you, I try to describe that aspect of it. The departure.
Well, yeah. How do you describe that? It's I've asked that question a lot because I have a young daughter myself, and though I'm not a veteran, I can't imagine leaving her for an extended period of time, especially to go into conflict. So how were you able to work through that?
Well, not easy. That's all I can say. Again, the book describes this process I went through. We finished the career course at Fort McClellan. There was 29 of us in the career course, very talented young officers, and 9 of them at the end of the course, a 9-month course. 9 of them got orders to Vietnam. I got orders to stay at the school and become an instructor. And I knew that wasn't going to work for me. I had to be part of the 9 guys who were going over to Vietnam, and so I volunteered. And it wasn't easy. I had long talks with Sue and my wife, and the orders they changed the orders, and the people weren't volunteering for Vietnam back in 1966. So they changed the orders almost, a set of circumstances came about. They needed a replacement, and that's why they took me 2 grades undergrade to fill this slot, and so it all worked out. But then I had about 2 weeks to bring my family, to settle my family and get out to Travis Air Force Base. And I mentioned in the book, this was just a blur in my memory, how we went from Alabama to Rhode Island, where I left my family and rented a house. And I was literally in my fatigues. They said I had to report to Travis. My orders said, report to Travis Air Force Base in fatigues, combat boots, because I thought they were going to take me off the commercial airplane, put me on a military airplane. I was going to fly to Vietnam. So the day I was leaving from Green Airport in Rhode Island to go to Travis, I was in my fatigues. In fact, I was hanging curtains trying to make the house as normal as possible before I left. And then I had to stop, and I laced up my combat boots in my living room and took my family to the airport. And again, I wouldn't be, this traumatic scene, I know it was repeated over and over again so many times, and mine wasn't any different. And my 7-year-old daughter, she was going to be 8 in just a few days, I think was really traumatized by this thing. And I bring all this out in the book as well, how my daughter Suzanne was another victim of the Vietnam War, because she had to, it affected her schoolwork, and she had to skip a grade or miss a grade. And anyhow, that all worked out very well in the end. The flight to Travis was one dark moment, as I recall. And there was a very kind, and here I am in my army fatigues, sitting on an airplane, sniffling a little bit, and I guess a very kind stewardess saw what was happening, and she tried very hard to make me feel better, but it was a bad dark moment. But then I get to Travis after this knocking myself out, and they said, "No, you're not going out. Go over to the BOQ and check out in a room there. You didn't have to come in fatigues." Oh God. And I waited 5 days at Travis, 5 days after knocking myself out to get there on the 1st of September. And then they finally get us out. Of course, as we're flying, there was a chartered flight, and they got us on the 149 of us on a chartered flight. Start out for Travis, and the airplane breaks down over. It doesn't break. I mean, it had trouble, so they landed in Seattle. So we had to spend the first night of my Vietnam tour in Seattle in a motel with 149 other guys, and then
there are worse things.
And then that long flight to Saigon on the 7th. And I say the 7th of September. That's very significant, because it turns out I walked on the airplane as a captain, but I got off as a major. Okay, that was my promotion day. Most unusual. But that caused great controversy, great distress on the far end, because they saw me, I still had my captain's bars on, and they saw me as a captain, and I knew I had orders to be a major to replace this division chemical officer in the 1st Cav. So they kept me there 5 more days until they got this all sorted out in a place called Camp Alpha, or what they call the Repo Depot, and it was nearby Tan Son Nhut. And anyhow, they finally clarified it, and then when the guy said, "Okay, you're clear to go to the 1st Cav at An Khe," he said, "But I can't get you there for 2 more days." That's right. I went over to Tan Son Nhut and I bummed a ride on a C-123, and they strapped me in as a passenger on a cargo plane, and I flew to, and that was my entry into the war, which then I did spend 3 weeks at the war, and the airplane crash came. So,
well, talk to me just a bit about those 3 weeks, like that you were very determined to get there and help the cause and be a part of what was going on. Did you feel in those 3 weeks before the crash that you were really a part of it and had your hands in it?
Yes, yes, very much. If I had, the 1st Cav went over as a unit, the whole unit went over just a year before, September of 65. Now, if I had been part of it, then I would have known the staff functions and all the personnel and procedures, SOPs, and everything else. So those first 3 weeks were a big learning curve for me. I had to meet people and get acquainted and so forth. But the division was at a high tempo right then. They were under this Operation Thayer, which was to separate the Viet Cong from the populace. Okay, that was the purpose of that at the time. So when I first got there, a couple of things came in right away. One was a tunnel they had found with a hospital complex, a Viet Cong hospital complex. And the guys had gone in and tried and cleared it. Some of these guys were brave as hell to go into those tunnel complexes. And they used smoke grenades to do some of the flushing out.
Mhm.
And one of the they ended up killing about 5 or 6 people from suffocation. There were female nurses on the Viet Cong. And so the first thing I walked in was the first staff meeting with General Norton and all these. I don't know any of them. They don't know me. And the first thing they do was pose a question to me: was there any issues in using smoke grenades in flushing out these people? And I had to rely upon any background and experience I had. You know, these were they call. They're really signal. You can use them for. There's nothing in the rules of the law of war that you can't use smoke to flush people out of places. So I helped them to make the. For people that are very sensitive back then about people being killed in tunnels, and especially from suffocation with smoke, and and of course the press is right behind you all the time, looking for a story. So we finally resolved that our position was that it was going to be okay to use the smoke for that purpose.
Yeah.
And then I got involved in the base camp, this huge base camp in An Khe. It really was a remarkable thing that they did, and take this piece of land and turn it into this massive airfield and complex. It was just amazing. But there was a lot of perimeter to guard. Initially, there were attacks against the base camp, but so they had to keep the foliage down. You know how virulent the vegetation was there.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a chemical platoon as a support for the division. These guys rigged up a helicopter with a boom, and they started using Agent Orange defoliant to spray the perimeter, and which was quite a remark. It did save a lot of manpower, because you had fields of fire that you can then have strong points instead of a perimeter kind of the defense, and so that was another thing. But except again, I realize now how casual they were handling that Agent Orange at the time. I saw these guys soaked in the stuff, loading the barrels, and we just didn't know. We just didn't know at the time.
Right.
I guess the other thing was, let's see, there was my learning curve was really going up. I was meeting people, trying to get myself established, and that's where on the 1st of October, they launched Operation Thayer. And to do that, we had to go to a forward. They took part of the division headquarters, moved it to a landing zone Hammond. It was an hour drive away. No, it was a day's drive away, an hour's flight. And so we motor convoyed to a landing zone Hammond, which is just an airstrip in the middle of the field. They were establishing these points all over the 2 Corps and the 3 Corps. And gosh, I'm losing my train of thought here. Well, and so the next day we participated in a moving a whole village of people. The mission was to separate the Viet Cong from the populace. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So I participated in this movement of a whole village of people with about 100 people, animals, everything from their village. They put them in a sports complex, and they were going to move them to a new village. They were just going to, and in the meantime, they were interrogating everybody in not the U.S. Army, but the South Vietnamese Army. And so that was quite a revelation. I was beginning to see what kind of war this was. It was,
Did it align with what your thoughts were back in the States before you left? As you were beginning to see what kind of war it was?
Yes and no. I knew you had to get to the hearts and minds of people, but to see it really happen, especially when well, you know, I got to tell you right now, this book is a lot about my friend Bob Ray, who was the G5, assistant G5, and he and I were working together that day, and it wasn't a pretty sight to see. They worked pretty hard on these some of the males to determine their loyalty and who they really were, and so it was a little hard to take to see how the Vietnamese soldiers treated the other people. Yeah, so yeah, to see your point, it's not what I expected, but I knew they had to do something to get to the hearts and minds of these people, and sometimes it gets rough. And then of course then Bob and I ran across this woman who had this ugly bandage on her leg, and we stopped, and no interpreter, but we got her to take the bandage off and layer upon layer, and then down at the bottom she had a big banana leaf on top of this ugly wound on her leg, and of course immediately we called for some help because it was a nasty bullet wound, and so, you know, how she got it, I don't know, but the Vietnamese did treat her, and but it was the next day that I got a message to go back to the base camp. That's when I got on the airplane, the Caribou. They used Caribous to liaison, they call them courier flights, between all the points where the division was located. They had these LZs not all over the place, but places where they could put in a landing strip. And that's where the STOL, or the short takeoff and landing, was so useful. And so they scheduled 2 flights a day of these airplanes to pick up wounded people like myself who had to come back for administrative reasons. I got called back to the base camp because I was, again, being new, I had to, oops, hang on, I'm gonna
call from name unavailable.
I was being called back to coordinate future chemical operations with the Corps chemical officer and so forth. Because I was only there 3 weeks, and I was getting my name known, and people were, so I ended up on scheduling that flight that day. And again, it's all in the book how it came about. The morning flight was canceled because of the monsoon rains coming in. But the afternoon flight did come in, and that's where there were 31 people, four crew and the passengers, and we took off in not ideal conditions. It was these STOL aircraft are really amazing. That's all I can say. They do land on just about minimal runway, and can take off at just about minimal runway. But anyhow, the flight back was about an hour. We flew in some bumpy weather. The monsoons were coming, and then we approached the base camp at An Khe, and this is all documented. What happened? There was a Army Aviation Digest report or story article on this. It's called "This Couldn't Happen to Me," and again, I put a copy of that in the book for all the technical reasons why we ended up flying into the side of that mountain. You could spend another book or another hour or so just talking about what happened, but the pilot was given a missed approach. He should have pulled away. There's and by the way, this is where the Air Force and the Army were trading long-range helicopters for the Caribou. So we had mixed crews. We had Air Force pilots and 1 Army crewman. The 2 units, 2 squadrons were next to each other at An Khe, but they were in this process of transferring the Caribous to the Air Force. And so we had a mixed crew that day of 3 Air Force, 2 pilots, crew chief, and one of the other crew chiefs, crew members was Army. But anyhow, there was mix up with the radar. They're expanding the airfield to get bigger aircraft, and so they moved the radar. And the Air Force guys who were probably not too familiar with either the Caribou or the landing situation, well, I don't know who, I would never point a finger at what happened, but we literally flew into the side of Hon Cong Mountain, which is the mountain dominating that base camp at An Khe. And
so there was no warning of this crash with you. You didn't feel like we're going down. There's no alert. It just,
there were 2 bangs. It was solid fogged. The first bang was the right wing hitting a tree, and it took off the wing. And then the airplane, taking off the wing, the airplane flipped over. The thrust from the other side flipped the airplane over. And so we went in, well, we didn't know it, but we went in upside down. And it just, the front of the airplane was split by a big mahogany tree. There are pictures of this in the book. They took the pictures the next day. And
I have the pictures here from your website, if it's okay that I share them.
Yeah, please, that might help to explain. Yeah, this is the airplane. That's the tail.
Mm-hmm.
That's the tail end of the airplane. The front is up here, and this is the door where they took me out. And
here?
Yeah, right there, right in that area. And the front of the airplane is just demolished. It's split. There are other pictures that might be more discreet. There's another one from the other. Yeah, that's the door they took me out of the airplane. There's one other.
When you say, sorry, would interrupt. When you say you didn't know it when it flipped the plane upside down, does it mean you were knocked out?
Yeah, I wasn't knocked out. It was a moment of blackness. I mean, I was being thrown. I was thrown forward and up at the same time, and then it must have been milliseconds, but it seemed like a moment of blackness. I just had no control of myself. I was just I flew through the air, I guess, but my seatbelt was trying to restrain me. Thank God we were all belted in, and I ended up on the back pile of a football pile of people. The airplane was stripped clean from the back right to the middle of the airplane. Yeah, that's another looking back at that tail. It's upside down, but it happened so fast we didn't know the airplane was upside down. And later on, when I found out, well, I was probably one of the few people really conscious and aware of what was happening. Most of them was either killed up in the front, or and Bob Ray, who was sitting, we ended up in the last 2 seats. The seatbelt had cut his, the force had cut into his stomach, so he was bleeding internally, and he was white as a sheet. And but he was into my right front. I finally got contact with another man I later determined was Jordan Brindley. He found his way out of this football pile of people, and we tried to open that door. And that's when we realized the airplane was upside down, because he kept pulling the door, and then we had to pull the handle the other direction because we're upside down. So we finally figured it out, and we got the door open, and I was able to give him my 45, and I told him to shoot three rounds, the universal signal for distress, and he did. And it was about 30 minutes later they finally found us and started the rescue operations.
Amazing that they found you within 30 minutes, even, because if it was sort of a surprise crash, how did they know? They said there was mist and fog. Like, the fact that they found you is almost a miracle.
Yes, to some extent. They knew we were down. Okay, they knew the airplane had crashed. We disappeared off the radar screen, and so people from the base camp knew the direction it was. They heard it. They heard it going over. There was a fuel. There was a company of loaded fuel. I've forgotten the name now, but it flew right over them, and they said, "Oh my God, that guy's going to crash." So they knew something was going to happen, so people started responding almost right away. But just to find us, they found us, and then but we were in such a difficult spot. We were 2/3 the way up the mountain, and it was very steep. Very steep. And at the top of the mountain, they had the signal corps facility. The thought was either they were going to take us back down the mountain and around the mountain to the base camp, or they were going to take us to the top. Well, initially they tried to bring us out with helicopters. Okay. They brought in a big Chinook, but that wasn't going to work. They got me out, and I'm laying on the ground right next to this airplane, and it's remarkable. Years later, I found out the guy who was standing next to me, Bob Buck, MP, was standing next to me the whole time. So we were able to reinforce our stories, or was able to support everything I said. Anyhow, they tried to bring in the helicopters, and this big Chinook wouldn't do it. It was just, there wasn't enough room, and the slope was so steep. Yeah, this is the view that's the front of the airplane here, and there's the big tree where, and we're upside down. So that's the bottom of the airplane up here.
Right here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm sure it's not easy to sort of, think through all of this. And were you injured?
Oh yes, that's again. I go into all the detail in the book. I sat down and I tried to recall as much as I could, as much detail as I could, as early as I could, because your memory starts going. But I think I got most of it. When I found myself in the back pile of that people in the airplane, it was floor to ceiling, people, bucket seats, seat belts. I tried to move forward, and that's when I knew I was injured. It wasn't any great pain, but I could not move my right leg. It just wouldn't go, and but I could crawl. I could move my upper part of my body, and I was able to help Bob Ray get him out of his seatbelt. He was all wrapped up in his seatbelt, but he was hemorrhaging, and his face was white as, and got him. He was in a fetal position, and although he was still breathing, I knew he could be all right. And then that's where Jordan Brindley. I'd have to describe the situation in the airplane. We had a stretcher case. The man was right there in front of me, unbuckled in the whole flight. And the young Army crewman, the specialist Bird, was at his head and holding him down. In fact, they gave up seats in order to get this injured soldier on the airplane. And in doing so, Bird was unstrapped. He just knelt next to this stretcher the whole way back. But when the airplane hit, that stretcher just went forward, and I ended up next to the guy who was on the stretcher, and he had a huge gash on his head. So I was able to, when I yelled, I said, "Does anybody have a first aid kit?" Somebody threw one out to me, and I was able to retrieve it and bandage.
So he was still alive, the guy on the stretcher?
Well, yes, he was still alive, almost incoherent. And that's where Jordan Brindley came out of the pile. And I gave him my pistol to open the door. And all this, I tried to put it in the sequence I remember, but I know there were a lot of thoughts flashing through my mind in those 30 minutes. Who are we going to be discovered, and who's going to discover us? The Viet Cong?
That's the other thing I thought of. Like, you think that just like, just the crash, just the tragedy of the crash and surviving that is enough. But you get out and you're like, wait a second, there could be Viet Cong out, and you might have to defend a position.
I was very happy when the voices I heard outside the airplane were speaking American, and
I'll bet.
So that worked out very well. So it turns out that the first guy they tried to pull up, the Chinook went away, and they brought in a Huey, and they dropped a wire caged device, stretcher, and they got this poor guy who had since this big gash in his head. He had a broken leg. That's the reason he was going back. Then he ended up with a broken arm. And for some reason, they said he was going to be the first one to go up in the. And for about the next, they tried 3 times to bring this guy up there. And by the way, they had people there with power saws. I don't know where they got them from, but all of a sudden, power saws are cutting down trees and trying to bring in enough room to bring in the helicopters. But they tried the third time. They got this guy right up to the door, and they couldn't hold that position, so they had to let him down again. So twice before this fall, that the people caught him. There was no problem. But the third time he came down, he unloosened himself, and he jumped from that, just a few feet to the ground, and said, "I'm not going back up there again." He let everybody.
This is the guy with a gash on his head and a broken leg and a broken arm. He's like, "I'm not doing that."
He got himself out of that wire mesh stretcher, and said, well, he used some very salty descriptive language, but he said, "I'm not going back up there for the third time." And then that's when they decided that it just the slope was too much for a helicopter, and for 50 feet or so off the ground, and then the guy, you're swinging back and forth, and it wasn't going to work. So that's when they decided to pack us on and take us up to the top of the mountain, and that became an ordeal in itself, because night had fallen. They brought in they were shooting flares off. They eventually brought in power generators, and they were lighting the scene. But by the time I left, it was all, by the time they packed me up in a stretcher and started up the side of the mountain to the top where this signal corps facility was, could land a helicopter there. They had, and then that's pretty much what happened. But that was an ordeal because it was almost vertical. How those guys got me to the top of that mountain, and that night with flashlights, and
I'm even just looking at these pictures. I'm not even sure how you found a spot to just sit outside of the plane. It looks like this was just heavy brush.
There was a spot just to the right of that doorway, where they either had cleared it, they started clearing right away. They did. There was a spot there that they laid me down. I was laying right outside the door on the ground there, and Bob Bach later on confirmed that's exactly what happened. He was one of the MPs, one of the first people on the scene, who got tied up with years later. 30-something years later, I finally got to talk with him. And that's part of the book too, by the way, just trying to find out other people who were involved through internet search and so forth. I was able to locate. I've located at least 5 of the survivors.
How many people survived total out of the crash?
They were 13 were killed, so 18 survived. Okay, and of that 18, I know 5 of them. I've located 5 of them, and and we're still searching if there's others out there. I came across the grandson of one of the survivors. He's passed on, but his grandson contacted me, and and we're still doing an active search if we can. My editor's wonderful woman. Is she on? I'm just wondering if she's on. Shauna, are you on?
Shauna, I did not see
Shauna
see
Perez. I invited Shauna to join if she could.
if she's not able to make it, this is always available like post recording on YouTube, so she'll be able to check it out. But
she's doing a wonderful thing. We've got the names, and so she's doing a countrywide search, which is not easy to see if she can locate these people. And
yeah, so you guys finally get evac from the top of the mountain.
Yep.
Your recovery. What was wrong with your leg?
Oh, what had happened, Sean? In a classic front car accident, the leg is driven through the hip, okay, and a piece of the acetabulum. I learned all these words. The hip bone is broken off, and the leg is out of the
socket.
The socket, so you just can't move it, and that's no. It wasn't any great pain, but it started getting bad after a while. But you cannot move. You cannot do anything with that leg while it's out of the hip socket. Mm-hmm. So when they got me down to the base camp hospital, the typical MASH. This was in fact, it's the history of this second surgical. It was the same one they tried to portray in MASH, but the history of the unit goes back to that. I describe in there how these by the way, we got some wonderful, the military medical people were just marvelous. That's all I can say. They got me two nurses, one started on one side, one started on the other, and they just, everything came off, and they started poking and where you're hurting, and they finally determined that my only injury was the hip, and then they did the X-ray, and then up to this point everybody thought I had a broken leg, but the femur was perfectly fine. It had just been driven through my leg had been driven through the hip socket. And that's classic in a front end automobile accident where people have their legs driven back. And I found out this later.
Yeah.
So what they had to do first was they gave me a spinal, and the orthopedist got on the table, put his knee between my legs and said, "I'm gonna put your leg back into your hip." And they did what they call a closed reduction. He wrestled my leg until it found the hip socket and popped it back in. And there was literally a pop in this operating room where I heard it, everybody heard it, the pop, my leg went back into my hip. And
you can see my face. It just did not, no, no, thank you.
It was a magic moment there. And then that's the best they could do with me at that time. So then, in order to keep this delicate balance between my leg back and my hip socket, with a piece of bone pushed out, it's still out there. And until I decide what to do about it, they put me in this body cast. Now that's another part of the book I describe. 6 weeks in a body.
Well, to give you a bit of background on myself, I broke my left femur when I was 6 years old. And I was in a full body cast for 6 weeks, and then in traction, then full body cast. I hear you. Full left leg, half right leg, up to your chest. You can't move. It's terrible.
That's where they moved me around to get me to Queen, and then from Queen to the Philippines. And it was the only way they could move me and not have this delicate balance between my leg bone and my hip socket. And so that's where I had my first unique experience with getting a bath by Kitsi Westmoreland in the Philippines. the flight that took us to the Philippines, and
Okay, so you just go down in a crash. There's this tragedy. You need to get out of Vietnam. You need to get on another plane. Was there any part of you that was like, I'm not doing that?
oh no, no, I was completely captive, completely submissive to what they were going to do to me. Now, was I uncomfortable getting back, putting me back on an airplane? Yeah, I've lived the life of having to fly. Well, I'm a million mile category with Delta or Pan Am and then Delta since then. So I've done an awful lot of flying since then, but if I'll tell you, I've never been comfortable flying anymore. Never once. So, especially when we're flying through clouds, and I get very nervous. But
was that the end of your war? You did the 3 weeks. There was the crash, and that was the end.
Yes, and I try to describe in there how in the Philippines they triage you there. They either going to send you to Japan, get you repaired, and back in the war, or if you're bad enough, they send you directly home to the States. Well, I got sent to Japan, so I was I really wanted to finish my tour. And by the way, my friend Bob Ray also got sent to Japan. He did go back and finish his tour, but I explained in the book why after 3 weeks in Japan in the 106 General Hospital, they couldn't operate on me there, so they sent me back to the States. So that ended my war. But up to that point, I wasn't sure whether I was still back in the war or not. So
were you still in your full body cast before they sent you back, when they sent you back to the States, or had you gotten out of that at that point?
Oh, yes, I described the C-141 flight from Yokota to Andrews and the reception we got there. And they kept me overnight at Andrews, and then put me on another smaller airplane and flew me to Chelsea Naval Hospital, which was the nearest general hospital, military general hospital, closest to my home, where I had Sue. My home was Rhode Island, where Sue was. So that's where they landed at Hanscom, took me in to the Naval Hospital. That's where the operation finally took place, where they repaired my hip.
Did you have to relearn to walk after that?
I was, well, in a sense, yeah. I was on a cane. I was on the crutches, and then I went from crutches to a cane. I think after a year, I finally got rid of the cane, and I describe in there my process where I had this famous medical board. They released me from the hospital in early part of the next year, and they said you're fit for duty, subject to a medical board in 1 year. So they gave me in the pulleys. They gave me a number that had to be corrected to 1, and so that's what happened during that year. My hip got better. I went from crutches to a cane, and then finally I had my medical board at Walter Reed, which I describe in the book. And what I had in my mind was going to be a medical board, and what turned out to be a very tired, overworked major doctor with a desk full of files, and he took my file off and said, "Well, how do you feel?" And I pictured a table full of doctors and cross swords and candles, and here I walk into this doctor's office with a very unshaven. He was, and he said, "Well, how do you feel?" I said, "Well, I feel okay." He says, "Well," he had me do some movements with my leg and my hip, and then he said, "Well, okay, what do you want?" And I looked at him and he said, "What do you want?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Do you want in or out?" And it finally dawned on me. He was saying, "Do I want to stay in the Army or do I want to get out?" And I was 10 years into my Army career. I wanted to finish my Army career, so I said, I want to stay in, and And he sort of grunted and put a mark on the piece of paper. He said, "Okay, you're fit for duty, but don't go jumping out of any airplanes in the near future." That was his parting shot to me, and that's how it all ended. After a year and a half, I ended up with this grizzled little doctor saying, "You're okay, you're fit for duty." And
but you never went back to Vietnam. You stuck around the States.
No. By that time, no, I never had the occasion to another assignment. I ended up the tour I was in at the Army Material Command. I was still involved with the Vietnam War, as I explained in the book. I was looking after they called the NSURE program, the expedited non-standard urgent requirement for equipment that comes out NSURE. And we were buying stuff off the shelf, sniper rifles, assault air, these boats, small boats, snake bite kits. we had a whole list of things we monitored and were buying and sending directly over, and trying to expedite and get around the long-term material acquisition process, which takes years. Got to write a requirement, and you've got to, and that worked out very well. So I spent 2 years working at that tunnel destruction systems, and I got to Pittsburgh. Got to Pittsburgh at the Bureau of Mines because they were the experts on mining, and we needed their expertise on how to blow up mines.
Did you feel disappointment that you weren't able to go back to Vietnam?
Yes and no. Well, remember, this is 66. Well, by the time I had my board, it was 67. By then, I went to the Command General Staff College at the Fort Leavenworth, and then a tour with the British Army. I was an exchange officer with the British Army for 2 years after that. So no, well, by that time the war had evolved into so many pieces and so forth, and in my particular technical branch, the Chemical Corps, there was little chance of my going back again. Mm-hmm. So no, I didn't see that happening again. I would have gone, but it just wasn't there anymore. So, and by the time, I was in my career pattern by then.
Yeah.
And I ended up at the chemical school, commanding the school battalion, and then various other things. So it's all. I want
to go back to this thought of you so well described how difficult it was to leave your family and your kids and get over there. And boy, they were not expecting to see you back as soon as you did come back.
Oh my
but I'm
God.
sure that the ordeal that you went through in Vietnam, what was your wife's thoughts on that? And a follow-up question to that is, now that you can tell your kids about what happened and they sort of understood getting into like teenage and adult years, what were their thoughts on it? But I wanted to start with your wife.
It's interesting you should mention that, because I have a piece in the book where I describe what happened when the telegram arrived. My wife's in this one little piece of the city of Warwick, and my mother's living not too far away in a little mill town of Natick, and they sent telegrams to both of them saying that I had been in an airplane crash and so forth. And Sue, across the street, there was a woman where Sue was walking our daughter to school every day, this 7-year-old, where they had to move her back a grade, because she frankly was traumatized and she was missing me terribly. But anyhow, Dawn Appleby would see Sue putting her on the bus. She found out that Sue I was deployed to Vietnam. So she invited Sue in and said, "Look, I just finished what you're going through. My husband was a doctor and with the 1st Cav Division in Vietnam. And so they would have coffee every morning. and she would turn on the news with the different channels that had all the war news. And then Sue would go home with Marley, our 18-month-old. But the morning the telegram arrived, the Western Union guy left a note in the mailbox. They had to deliver it directly. They just couldn't leave the note, the message. But everybody saw they knew what it meant. The other neighbors knew what was happening. They saw the Western Union guy leave the note. When Sue got back, she saw the note, called the Western Union guy. He came out and delivered the message to her. And Sue immediately went across the street to Dawn Appleby, because she and Dawn in turn called her husband, who was doing an internship at a Boston hospital. And he said, well, it looks like the war's over for Joe. A copy of the message is in the book. I kept it all these years. And so that's how Sue found out. And
what was the first time that you talked with her after the crash?
it was on a telephone call from Japan. That was the first time that I was able to talk to her. And I described that in the book too, how I think it was the Red Cross that arranged it, but there was a phone call from the 106 General Hospital. Yeah. The other interesting part, my mother's reception of the same telegram, okay, and it's going to two different places, and I had to explain in the book how my brother, at the very same time I'm crashing into a mountain in Vietnam, he's over in Italy, getting married, got married, okay, long story, but it's all in the book.
And you can see it on your website too. I noticed on your website there's you have some like journaling here in the website, and you do describe how you're in the crash, and then on the other side of the planet in Italy is your brother who's getting married to a woman that your family doesn't know.
No, that's exactly right. So my mother's in the living room. My brother sends her a telegram that says, I'm coming into Logan, and I'm going to bring my wife, my new wife. And so my mother's very excited about all this, and from the old village in Italy. And she has a room full of people, a living room full of people discussing what's happening. And the doorbell rings, and there's the Western Union guy. And he has his telegram, and she says, oh, I've been expecting that. Thank you very much. And she takes it and she puts it in her apron pocket. She thinks it's the telegram from my brother giving the details of his flight back from Italy. And the Western Union guy must have shook his head. This has got to be the most callous woman. And so she says, thank you very much. And off he goes. And she never reads it. She goes back to the living room and they chat some more. It wasn't until Sue called a few minutes later. Oh, I could see what Sean is on. Okay. Yeah. My mother finally took out the telegram and read it for the first time. So I thought that was amusing and worth putting.
Oh, I'm sure that was not like her reaction to that telegram in the midst of that room was probably.
Yeah. Well, the telegram was somewhat neutral in the sense that it said I was injured, it wasn't life-threatening, and that I'm being taken care of, and that was about it. That's all they had to go on. So we have a copy of it in the book.
We have a question here in the chat. It's from Jim Puhala. Jim, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, hi, Jim.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. As I said in the chat, I was with the Cav in '67.
Okay.
But didn't spend a lot of time at An Khe. My question is, wasn't Hon Cong Mountain inside the perimeter of the camp, or was it outside the perimeter?
It was outside the perimeter, Jim.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, and that's why I didn't know. By the way, I didn't know where we were. I didn't even know we were on the side of a mountain until they pulled me out. And then they started packing me I didn't realize we'd crashed into the side of a mountain. I didn't know where we had crashed. So it wasn't obvious at all.
Was the cav patch on the mountain when you
Yes.
crashed?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And where was the crash site in relation to the patch?
About 2/3 of the way down that mountain. The mountain's 2,900 feet. We flew in around 2,300 feet.
And you were on the front side of the mountain, same side as the patch?
No, on the back side.
Oh, on the back side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Because
So,
if you were on the front side, they could have seen you from the camp.
but again, understand, it was solid fog. Everything was, anything above where we crashed, I guess nobody was seeing. You could hear stuff up above you, but you couldn't see anything. It was pretty thick monsoon kind of cloud cover that day. So
Lee Corfield also put a comment here in the chat. Lee, I don't know if you want to chime in with what your experience was with the C7-A Caribou. Did you ever, what were your thoughts on the aircraft, if you're still with us?
Sean and everyone on here. Yeah, I was assigned to the 458 Tactical Airlift Squadron at Cameron Bay in 69 and 70. And partway through the year, one of the guys says, well, why don't you go up with them sometime? I said, all you got to do is ask the commander. So I didn't know that many flight crews because we were the 457th and 458th based out of Cameron. You had 6 different squadrons over there, 2 in Vong Tau.
Right.
And 2 at Cameron.
Right.
And trying to think where the other 2 were. Anyway, I volunteered to go up, and the first time up, all I did was a crew chief. And we going up, and the one sergeant said, there's where we're going to land down there. And I'm looking out those little 9-inch windows there. And I said, where? I'm looking for a paved runway. And he started laughing. He says, you wait, we'll be there in a minute. I'm still looking out the window. I said, I don't see what you're talking about. And there was a piece of dirt down there. And by the time he landed and reversed the props, and that dust and crap was blowing everywhere. But what an airplane. And Colonel, you are so lucky. That place was the smallest type of airplane. You had the C7-A, the C-123, and the C-130 over there.
Yeah.
But it was the smallest and would land in the shortest runways that you can imagine.
Yeah.
And I think I went on about 8 missions. And there's other ones I could talk a lot about, but an unbelievable. That's the reason the tail's shaped like it is, so you can get it up off the ground quicker. And,
I was wondering that because I noticed, I'm looking at the tail and I'm like, that looks really odd, but yeah, to get it
Like you see the 123 and the 130 both look the same way, but this was the shortest, but to go on some of them trips with those guys, and it's utterly amazing. Colonel, glad you're here.
Yeah, de Havilland did a super job developing that airplane. And all these kind of bush airplanes, the Otter and all the others, they all this experience, but they put together a very tough airplane, and the people who flew them, there's, by the way, there's a whole association with former Caribou pilots and Otter pilots, and they've done a lot to help me and promote the book. I got a lot of information from them too. Because they're a well source of a lot of information on the Caribou, and but we found out some interesting insights into oh, there's Shauna. Hi, Shauna.
Hi, I spaced, and I'm in another time zone. So anyway, yeah,
this is my editor, folks.
I was gonna have you point out that was kind of the beginning of your discovery journey. Was you found the de Havilland website and you posted on there saying this tough old bird kept me alive in this crash. And that became the, the first domino to fall as you discovered more about what had happened.
That's a good point, Shauna. My first real discovery was the Vietnam veterans.
That's right. Yeah.
the virtual wall, where I finally find out who the names of the 13 people who were killed. I never had a full list of those people. And then from there, as Shona said, I was able to, I thought I'd check out the airplane. This airplane saved my life. And so that's where I went to the Caribou and found out of de Havilland, who made it. There's a wonderful history of the airplane. In fact, there is a history of every single 200 and something that were ever built, where they are now, whether they've been salvaged, they've been crashed. The airplane I was in, it shows crash. And so, but that's where it started, and that's where I posted my first inquiry for anybody reading the site. Does anybody know about the crash? Does anybody? And it was like a shot in the dark. And sure enough, except many years later, I did get responses. People did answer that little blurb I put in the what was it, Shona? I guess
The
it was
comment box. The comment box on the de Havilland site.
a comments box. Who do you think is going to pick up that? But I've got two people to pick up on it, and one of them was a guy who was standing next to me when they pulled me out of the airplane. So go figure.
And he's still with us. You've talked to him recently too. Well, I hope he's still with us. He had been sick.
Yeah. So, and then the other one was a former pilot who put us on the Caribou and Otter. Help me out, Sean.
The Caribou Association. Let's see, what is it? It was the Air Force Association of the people who had flown those aircrafts. I can't think of the full name at the moment.
I can't either. But these guys, there's so much experience and so many experiences. It's extensive use that they put an association together of former pilots and people who just love the airplane, and they're still active. I think they've probably been reduced in intensity over the years, but they're still a very active group. And that's what the second person who answered me put me on to them, and they in turn did give me two firsthand accounts of the crash from people who were there. And so
Joe, I want to make sure that, because we chatted about it before we started the program today, was one, like, how did surviving this crash change your outlook on life? And how did that lead you to your faith? Because that was something that became very important to you. But I wanted to make sure that we had time to chat about that as well.
Oh, thank you for that, because the book does have a spiritual dimension. And I had to, Shona and I finally resolved that I was trying to figure out why I survived, okay? And I pinned it down to that day in Japan when I finally got the mail and I saw a picture of my 18-month-old daughter, and I realized I may have never seen her again. That it all came into focus, and I made a resolution that day that I was going to find out why I survived, and I may never. But in order to do that, I had to I look for answers. Well, I could give you rational answers that I ended up at the back of the airplane along with Bob Ray. I ended up, so people in the back survived, the people in the front were killed. Why did I end up in the back that day? And it was a case of either the luck of the draw or just one of those unfortunate accidents that I survived, or there was something greater. Now I can't push that argument because the people who died, I can't explain that, but I'd like to try and at least explain why I survived. Okay, and so I've spent a good part of the rest of my life trying to figure out why I survived, and I had to go back to my spiritual basis, my spiritual life, and that's where the front part of the book comes in, and the second part of the book comes in. I did end up becoming a deacon in the Catholic Church for the 4-year formation process, one step below a priest, and I just retired from that last year. So
Hey, congrats. Congrats on retirement.
that was my third retirement. Yeah, all right.
No, yeah, you don't need one.
Retired,
Might as well go for 3.
Retired. So yeah, gosh, I don't know. Did I? Oh, well, I forgot the question now. That's my 88.
Well, how did it change your outlook on life, surviving this? And you're answering in the sense of like trying to answer this question, and how did that lead you to your faith? And especially, I mean, to become a deacon, that had to go through a decision to become one. And
Yes.
was it because of the crash that you decided that it pushed your life that way?
I have a section in the book on that. I start with the Mark Twain's quote, what are the 2 most important days in your life? And one is the day you're born, and the other one is the day you find out why. Okay, so I finally figured out what the second good reason why I was born, and that was why. And that's when, now people might say you should have come to that conclusion after you survived the plane crash, but it really didn't happen until years later that I decided to become a deacon. But it certainly influenced my outlook on life and why I survived. Oh gosh, I don't know. Did I help me out, Shauna? What else did I do?
Shauna, I had a question for you as well. I think you're one of the first editors we've had on the program with the author. What drew you to Joe's story? How did you help him mold this? And a lot of what we've heard of veterans writing is very much healing from the trauma of war, to the trauma of their experiences, things like that. How did you help to work this story? As I was talking with Joe before we started the program, I very much like a story arc. As a storyteller myself, I like to have a beginning, middle, and end. I like to know what the full breadth of this character is, whether they be real or not. How did you help that process along?
Well, he came to me July 2020. And because of the pandemic, he'd had a chance to kind of go through things some more and tweak. And he just wanted to know, because, I was an editor, do I have a book or not? And honestly, the core story of the survival the crash, the survival, and then how we found things out, I thought that was all.
We just lost your audio. Sorry, hold on, Shauna. Shauna, can you hear me? We can't hear you, Shauna.
Thought I was going to be a ghostwriter and help him write this other part, but no,
you're back.
Written it when he was 65 and going through this process, and back when everything was still, intact up here, all his memories. So he'd written all that out, and I said, we gotta, we want to build the whole picture. How did you end up in the Army? Why was it, for people who are looking at going into the Army or going to a military academy, what put him on that path? And then his faith it came out in lots of ways in it. So it's part of how he got down to take the test to get into West Point, was thumbing a ride and, God looking out for him and making it that way, because it was a long ways. And, he was a little unsure if he should put all the faith stuff in it, but I actually, I started out working with Zondervan Publishers. So I'm a Christian, I usually do Christian books, and of course memoirs, as long as they're clean. I do those too. But I encouraged him to include those points, because even someone who doesn't have that touch point, it might guide them to something in their lives as well. So you could see God's hand in his life from the time he lost his father and on. Like, God gave him people in his life that directed him and helped guide him when his dad had died when he was 17. And anyway, it was just very apparent in this book. And of course, when he was writing that, it was involved in, what is my experience as a Catholic, as a Christian, in my life. And so it had all these space stories in it. So I told him they needed to be in there. And I don't think he quite got to the end, but you know, if you get the book, obviously you'll read this, but you know, part of why he, you know, as he worked out, why did I survive? It tied into his friend Bob Ray and him taking mass that morning before the crash. And, you know, for him to be able to share that later on at the funerals of his, you know, well, at a Memorial Day service, and then at a funeral, and then at another funeral, you know, it's like he it just came into his life, and he's told me he thinks about it every day, and his tagline is "Every day is Christmas," because obviously, you know, when you know that you should have died that day, every day is a gift. So
yeah, thank you. I should remind everybody of my tagline or my mantra. Every day is Christmas. People ask me, and this I put in, I wrote this in the book too. How does it feel to surviving an air crash? Well, if the occasion requires just a quip, I just say, well, don't try this at home. Or I might quip, if you're putting a bucket list together, you can forget this one. But the one I tell very seriously is every day is Christmas. And that's the one that it's become my tagline. Thank you, Sean. That's a good description of it. Mantra, tagline. People ask you how you doing. I say every day is Christmas. So, and I say it with sincerity. And
how did writing the book help you to heal from the trauma of the crash, from the, you know, really sort of, and get some answers to the questions you had?
Oh, it was a wonderful experience. Yeah, did I ever think I'd write a book? Yeah, no. Thank God for people like Sean who gave me the encouragement to do it. So yes, I think it's helped me. I feel like I've got. You're always looking for something, and I think this is one thing I did finally reach. And when I see my book, I got a great deal of satisfaction. A lot of, hate the word completeness, but I think we rounded a circle here.
yeah, and in our journey of trying to find more, you know, I was backtracking what he had gone through, and you know, the places he had been, and I found some new messages on the de Havilland website that were from 2015 and 2016. And we found the captains, the family of the captain that flew the ship. And Joe, go ahead and tell them about that part.
Oh, I think this is fantastic. Even, remember I said two hits on that contact. Then there were two more. Years later, it was, thank God, Shona said, hey, well, let's check it again. And sure enough, there were two more. One was the grandson of one of the survivors, and he's still in the service, and we communicated. But the second one was the family of the pilot of the airplane, Chris Webster, David Webster, and I got his granddaughter had posted on the comment thing and said, yes, my grandfather was in there, and that started a series of emails back and forth with the son, Chris. In fact, the series of emails were so complete in themselves that we just reproduced them because they tell the story. My contact with the son of the pilot and how he was just a kid at the time. There's a picture in the book of the time David Webster, the Captain Webster, was leaving for Vietnam. It's just about the same time I was, and it really got to me to think of path of destiny. I'm leaving my family in Warwick, Rhode Island, and he's leaving his in Alabama, and we both ended up the destiny of us coming together that day. And then the final tragedy was Chris, the son Chris, got to read the manuscript, but he ended up getting COVID and passed away just before publication. So that was, we managed to get that in the book, right, Shauna? So, yeah, it was so many, I tell you, there's so many coincidences. I just can't believe it was random. Things happened to me that were just too hard to explain, but with random, and my association with Bob Ray, and the mention of we both attended field mass the morning of we got on the airplane. There was just two of us at the mass on the hood of a Jeep. I mean, how could I forget that? And then we both end up in the airplane that day and survive it. You can put your own rationale on it, but I think I know what mine was.
Joe, I want to open it up to the room here to see if there are any other questions for Joe Tedeschi before we finish up. But we have links to your book in the chat here for anyone who would like to find a website here.
Frozen.
Sorry, Shauna, go ahead.
I said, everyone on the screen is frozen for me, but I can hear.
Okay, your screen has popped on and off a bit, your audio. So I think we've been good on our end, but
okay, good.
We
okay.
might having a bit of Wi-Fi trouble, but
yeah. I wanted to point out, I didn't hear all of Joe's comments, but the importance of getting these stories out there is, Joe didn't know till he was, in his 60s, what actually had happened, who else had died, and he just has to piece it together from these little clues online. And we documented that journey. And then we found this pilot's family, and reading their responses just is overwhelming because, they had this big, deep, dark hole, his wife really never did recover from it, from what we understand. But it was, because Joe took the effort to write his story down, to reach out to these people, get their perspectives, and then it goes into the hands of the pilot who gave his life that day. It's just a full circle, And for Joe, I know.
Well, I think I know where Shauna was going. Yeah, it was a fantastic. Shauna, we're missing your audio. Yeah, it was a fantastic. It was a story a sub story unto itself that we ended up the book. We didn't plan it. It shows up in the epilogue because that's where it was. And it all came at the very end there. You can see the dates on the emails and so forth. And the son, Chris, who passed on from COVID. And there's a sub-story there too, because he wasn't there when his father left for Vietnam. And he had a very bad asthmatic condition. And he never forgave, he always felt very bad, but this book helped him to heal that part of his life. So when I sent the book to all the family members, I've gotten some wonderful responses from them. I think there was some healing that went on that I didn't mean. It happened that we were part of the healing that was going on in the family. So,
certainly.
Don't you agree?
Yeah, that's what they said. The youngest son said specifically that he had been through all kinds of counseling and everything else and thought he had dealt with it, but this truly brought him to a closure.
Yeah. So
well, I think that's kind of a good note here to end the program on, is the closure that this book has helped to bring to more than just yourself, to families as well, or at least some of the families of the victims of the crash. But if there are not any other questions here in the room, I want to thank Joe and Shauna for coming on and talking about the book, A Rock in the Clouds. So we have links in the chat here. You can also find links for the book on DBC's social media. We hope that you can grab a copy and read Joe's full story. Joe, I thank you so much for being here and for telling your story and for your honesty today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Veterans Breakfast Club, and Shauna, and all of you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. We'll be back on Saturday night. We'll hope to see you there. And Joe, we hope to see you back on VBC. You're welcome anytime. Shauna, you as well. We hope to see you guys again, and stay safe out there.